Welcome back to Discipleship with Bori, the podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about a story in Genesis chapter 19 about the origin of the nation of the Moabites. Now, the Moabites have historically been, throughout the Bible, this nation of people that directly opposed God's people and threatened their safety, that came up against them in war and really persecuted them. And not God's people. Though there were times where there was peace between God's people, the nation of Israel, and the Moabites, but for the most part, the Moabites opposed them. And I want to talk about the origin story and kind of make some correlations between the themes in that story of how this nation became and our life today. So this origin story is actually pretty disgusting. It starts off with Lot. Lot was Abraham's nephew, and after Sodom and Gomorrah got destroyed, they had to choose a land between Abraham and Lot chose the bigger of the land. And he chose the bigger piece of land because it was bigger, right? And I think even right there, we can start off by like identifying how we desire things as Christians that may seem better. We may desire things that other people have because it seems like more than what we have, and it's so important to like check those emotions of like what we covet or what we desire or what we think we need or what we want, because I think it really distracts us from what God is doing in our lives right now, and it leads us to essentially try to control our fate, try to control and write our own story. Because as believers, we are told in the Bible to deny ourselves and take up our cross daily, meaning that this is already the struggle. Like if we're supposed to deny ourselves and take up our cross daily, there's this idea behind that is we're already supposed to start 5 steps behind, right? We're taking up our cross. That means we're doing something that most people who aren't believers do. They're not denying themselves. We have to deny ourselves of the things that we want. We have to check our emotions at the door. We have to keep our ego intact. We have to make sure that we're not making decisions based on what our flesh wants. That's a decision that we have to make every day. And that's already, like I said, putting us 5 steps behind, because it's like those things don't come natural to us. Denying yourself isn't something that comes natural to you. There's no instant gratification in that. Denying yourself and choosing God's will oftentimes is a very painful and a decision that causes a lot of struggle in our lives as Christians, and something that we as believers, if we want to follow Christ and be a disciple, then it's something that we have to struggle with the whole life on earth, right? Our entire time on earth, we have to continuously check our emotions and the way that we want to react to something, though it may be justifiable. We have to pay attention to and check those emotions. And I I was watching the UFC fight this past weekend, UFC 313. It was a pretty big fight for the main card, and these fighters, they stepped into the ring and you saw the focus on their face. But leading up to the fight, there was a lot of this promotion that goes on where they're like talking smack about each other and they're trying to build up hype for, um, you know, the the sale of the fight. And these fighters are trying to give each other more reason to hate them, so that when they get into the ring, it's just overcome with emotion, anger, and the desire to win. They're building up that desire to win. And all that emotion that exists outside of the fight in the octagon is really for the preparation of, you know, the desire to win. But once they get into that ring and once that bell rings and the fight starts, all of that emotion is checked in a certain way where they have to now be strategic. yes, they may be angry and still have that strong desire to win inside of them, but they have to have a mental fortitude enough so that they can still focus and, carry out the strategy that they trained for, and that they can be very intentional about their breathing and their focus so that they can win. And that's really us as believers, right? Like, we have these emotions, whether it be to desire something that someone else has, and it's very justifiable because we look at what we have and we may feel justified in wanting more. Like, God, I've been serving you, and I've been, obedient, and I've been tithing, and it feels like I don't have as much as other people do. And that's a very understandable emotion. However, that emotion can definitely snowball into something greater. Than it becomes a bitterness that we have, a resentful, and then maybe we even start taking matters into our own hands to try to control our lives, when we have to remember that Christ called us to deny ourselves and we're supposed to fully surrender to God. So it's like these emotions can cause us to fall outside of God's will. And we don't want that as believers, right? We want to stay in God's will, but and so how we do so is by locking in, like checking our emotions, understanding that they have a purpose, yes, but we still have a responsibility, even though our emotions say one thing. They may not be how we need to respond to the situation in our lives. And similar to like Lot, he chose a bigger piece of land just because it was a bigger piece of land. But you're not really that's not really what why you need to do something, right? Just because it has more doesn't mean that it's better. And we need to check our emotions so that we're making sure that we're making the decisions that is in alignment to God's will for our life, so that we don't end up like Lot. And we'll get to what happened to them and later, but it started with him desiring more. It was started with a greed. It started with a small emotion that led to a decision, that led to another decision, that led to eventually death, right? The wages of sin is death. And what happens in the story of Lot in this situation is a birth of a nation that would continuously oppose God's people, the Moabites, right? It started with a decision of greed. And our emotions, we may justify it all day, but if we don't check it, the wages of sin is death. And it's only going to snowball, and the enemy can use those little emotions that he plants in our heart, in our minds, in our thoughts. And if we don't check those in prayer, if we don't check those at the throne of God, if we don't deny ourselves, that will snowball into something greater that will destroy us in the future. So Lot chooses this big piece of land, and when he gets to the land, he realizes that it's kind of desolate. There's no one else there, and he goes to this piece of land with his two daughters. And the story is disgusting, but his two daughters realize that this land is desolate, and they have no one else there to carry out their purpose, which is to have children, right? Women in biblical times, really, if you could have children, not having children wasn't an option. That's just something that they did. That was just second nature to them. Oh, okay, I can have children, let me do it. And so they're in this situation where there's no one else to have children with beside their father. And so they get their father drunk and they do the unthinkable. Really disgusting, but it starts off with greed. And this is it's symbolic. It happened in real life, right? The Bible documented that this thing happened in real life, so it's historical, but it's also now in our lives symbolic, right? It may not happen verbatim in our life today, like something so crazy, but the message is still the same. How something so small, an unchecked emotion, or a misplaced intention, or the desire for us to start controlling our lives and taking control of our purpose instead of surrendering to God, they have adverse effects on our lives. And then we wonder how we got to addictions, and we wonder how we got to depression and things like that. Is because we are not constantly going to God's throne and constantly denying ourselves. And I think all Christians can relate to that in some way. Like, we're not perfect, right? But this is an exhortation to go to prayer with your emotions, and go to God with those things that we feel, even if we might even see them as small. Like, we're looking at someone else have more money and live a certain life, and it's like, maybe that emotion starts off as something small, but if you find yourself continuously thinking about things like that, then it's very important to take that to God in prayer. He's not going to be offended by this desire that you have, but he will change the thought pattern that you may have and change your perspective and allow you to be a little bit more grateful about the things that he is doing in your life, so that you don't fall into that snowball effect of death, essentially. So, yes, Lot's daughters, they get pregnant by their father, and the oldest oldest daughter's son um, was Moab, and thus became the birth of the nation of the Moabites. And the Moabites, like I said, they constantly opposed God's people. They were outside of God's will completely. That they had unchanged hearts toward them. And like I said, it's a snowball effect, and it's unchecked emotions, it's unchecked feelings. It's us not locking in when we go through things in life, or when things happen to us, and our initial thought and our initial motive is to handle this thing ourselves. But the Bible has a completely different perspective on it, right? It's like, surrender to God, pick up your cross daily, don't act on your emotions. In Deuteronomy chapter 20, it was this story about how the Israelites like taking new territory, and God instructs them as they're taking the new territory to not cut down the trees in the land that they're about to enter in. It's like, they're sieging a new territory. They've taken it. They're on the brink of victory, and they're out there wilding. They're destroying everything as they should be. But God instructs them specifically, don't cut down those trees because you're going to need them in the future. And it's like, we're overcome with emotion. We are emotional beings, right? And we think that we know best. And it's like, God is giving us a specific instruction not to ruin our blessing, not to take that um, the how we want to and how we think we should respond to a situation, and not act on it without approaching God's throne first and seeking his direction. Another story I think about is in Joshua chapter 6 or Joshua chapter 7, or one of them. Right after Joshua led the nation of Israel, um, to conquer the city of Jericho, they take the city of Jericho, and now there's another nation that opposes them, and the other nation is much smaller, so they think that they would automatically have the victory. However, Joshua does not consult God before he goes up against this army, which is a huge mistake, because as a result of not seeking God, there were some things in the nation of Israel that there was sin amongst them that Joshua didn't know about, and he would have known about it had he went to God and prayed about this battle that they were going up against. However, he saw that the enemy was smaller than theirs, and he realized that in the past they just took down the city of Jericho, which was like a fortified city, and it was great and it was mighty. And he just figured, like, maybe great, because they're smaller, we could just go ahead and have victory against them. However, they did not have victory against them. And then Joshua, in I think chapter 8, got upset. He tore his clothes and he sought God, and God revealed to him that there was some sin that needed to be dealt with before they can go up against this other nation. And it's like, yeah, we think we know what to do, but we don't. And it's okay, because God's throne is always available to us. Prayer is always available to us, but that is such an important resource and tool. And I would say you start with every decision that you have to make, start with by taking that into prayer and seeing what God is going to speak to you about that situation and how he wants you to handle that thing and how he wants to validate your emotions by giving you a different instruction that you would have taken. But you never know with God. Like it's a mystery, right? Why would he have me pick up stones against Goliath when there are other weapon options? There's swords, there's javelins. He tells me to pick up stones. Like, why would he speak to the Red Sea to part? Why would you have me lift out my staff? Like, wouldn't you just want me to build a boat? The mystery of God and the directions that he gives us, we can't fathom it, we can't understand it, but we have to be obedient, because the result of our obedience is God will move on our behalf and he will fight for us. But he requires that surrenderance first, that sacrifice. Do we really trust him? And it goes with surrendering our emotions and the way that we think we should go about things in order for us to experience the miracle that he wants to do in our lives. I think I'm at this situation in my life right now where it's like, I don't know why God has called me to the thing that he's called me to in this season. And it's difficult to every day trust that this is the thing that God has called me to do. So let me just lean on him. And it's like, I can take control of the situation. I can, you know, figure this out on my own, but God has given me a specific instruction. So if I decide to abandon that, then it would be disobedience, and then it would be essentially me doing what Lot's daughters did, right? Like taking matters into my own hands. But the wages of sin is death, and disobedience is sin, and that will lead to death. So it's like, yeah, this story historically happened in the Bible, but like it's symbolic to our lives today. What comes of us not surrendering to God? What comes of us trying to take matters into our own hands, though we know Christ? I think for people who don't know Christ, it's not that much of a wrestle when it comes to the decisions and the things that they have to do, because they are denying Christ altogether. But when you know Christ and you walk with him and you're trying to be a disciple, he calls you to do some strange things, and it may seem contrary to what the goal is ahead of you. But when you trust God, man, he works in your future because he's there and he's putting pieces of the puzzle together. Though you can't see it now, you will enter it. So this is an encouragement to continue to trust God and continue to surrender to him, because he is working on your behalf. And that's why we have these stories in the Bible that show us, like, when people have trusted in God and have trusted the word that he's spoken to them, victory did come about. And those victories are still possible and still happen today if we're willing to do the trusting and the surrendering. So I know it was a little bit of a weird story, but it's in the Bible and it's in there for a reason. And I think because it's so weird and it's so disgusting, I think we shouldn't just kind of brush it off as, well, that will never happen today, but kind of understand that the what makes you disgusted by it is sin, essentially. And that's how God views it. That's how God views sin when we decide that we're going to take matters into our own hands. And the fruits that come of it are the fruits that come of our decisions when we decide to be disobedient to Christ. So be disgusted. Be disgusted by our sin and be disgusted by disobedience, so that we can lock in even further and realize that God has a specific plan for our life for a reason. He's given me a specific instruction for a reason. Let me not do this disgusting thing and disobey him, so I can see the fullness of the glory in his plan in my life. So, hope this gave you some perspective. Stay encouraged and be blessed. Peace.